Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me here for episode 6 of In the Fire Garden. Today, I'm here with Dior J. Stevens. Uh, Dior is a proud Pisces, hailing from Midwestern waters. He is the author of the chapbooks Scream and Lavender, 001, and Canon. Their debut full collection, Cruel Cruel, is available now with Nightboat Books. They are the managing poetry editor of Foglifter Journal and Press. They tweet at Dolphin Neptune and Instagram at Dolphin Photos, which
Wow.
those things and the link to their book I'll put in the description box to check out as well. Here is their awesome book with a wonderful cover, like I said, from Nightboat. Dior, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks for having me.
So, to start, before we get into the reading of your book, which is just so interesting and so different than anything I want to talk about, just to introduce us to the book and everything. One, we got to start with the look of it. It's just so awesome. So we always like to think that covers, we all as readers and as people with books, we like to think the covers are important and everything like that, or certainly at least complementary to what the book's going to have. But it seems like Cruel, the cover is so important to reading it, especially because of the pages, which is one unique thing about it. We have the yin yang symbol, we have the pages that go to black and white and everything. So not just to the presentation of the work, but also I feel like to the interpretation of the book, the aesthetics of it are so crucial. Uh, was that going through your mind the whole time?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. Like 12,000%. But very, I mean, as you can see a little bit behind me, a very visual artist as well, and just a visual person. And once I kind of allowed myself to lean into the black and white pages, and then the obviously the middle, what I call the vortex section or the black hole section, I knew then I needed the cover to like really suggest it and match that. I love that people obviously get the yin yang, the Tai Jitu from the cover because that's absolutely an influence. The Tao Te Ching is one of the most influential books in my life. I reread it at least once a year, if not more. And it's just something I like kind of live with as a very central part of my spirit and my being, the yin and the yang, the chaos and the order, the femininity and the masculinity, all of these things are very central to the piece, but also too, very kind of literally, it speaks to a lot of the racial tension and concerns that the poems in the book really are moving through in the wake of 2020 and all the myriad of things we were dealing with in terms of race in that year. And so it just became so necessary for me to make it very simple. I was almost kind of worried for a while that it was too simple of a cover, but I'm grateful to hear these responses. People are really into the cover of the book, and I really appreciate it because it mattered so much to me. I had some great members of Nightboat who were very willing to respond to my very specific notes and made this wonderful piece happen.
Yeah, and that's great because jumping to Nightboat, a wonderful press, kind of like a prestige premier poetry press, and it seems like if there's any kind of press that would be able to go along with the innovation you had in mind for this book, it would be an innovative press like that as well. What was it kind of like working with Nightboat?
Oh God, it has been and just was great. In so many ways. I mean, I'm sure one day they'll tell me no about something, but usually are willing to do all of my little crazy ideas or go with them. I mean, I was so nervous they were going to say no to the black pages and white text, but they were very down from the beginning. Even the cover, again, I had very seriously considered guidelines that I wanted for the cover. And they sent me, forget at first it was like 6 or 10 covers. And I think we immediately just kind of gravitated towards this. And then even the font of the cover was the whole thing. I mean, the design of this book took honestly just as much effort and time as the actual language of the book. It took a lot of effort actually. And they were just willing to be great partners with me along all that journey and that process. I really love Nightboat. I love what they stand for. I love the books that they publish. I love my fellow Night Boat co-authors were all just so varied and diverse and queer and trans and Black and brown and beautiful, and just like really where I needed my first book. For this to be the first, the debut, this feels like the perfect home for me and for the book.
Yeah, it's definitely a very awesome addition to their catalog, which is, like you said, so radical in just everything. Every book is so different
Yeah.
from another one, and yet everything, all the aesthetics seem to nonetheless fit a style that you're like, oh yeah, that's a Nightboat book for sure.
Great editorial team. They have a good eye. Yeah.
So when you submitted this manuscript or put it, I was wondering about the logistics to it. Did you have, because it's did you find a way to prepare like black pages, or did you make little notes on there like, I want these pages black?
Oh man, I mean, from like, so this was my MFA thesis. And I remember one of my advisors at the time, Rita Bullwinkle, who's an incredible author. Everyone should check her out. She was my advisor for a lot of the process of this, the formation of this book. And I remember exactly where I was, like just like the weather and everything. We were on the phone having one of our meetings. It was still COVID, the first year of the pandemic. And I was like, I have this really crazy idea. Like, I really want the middle section of this book to just be black pages and white text. Like, I don't know if that's wild. And she was just like, absolutely, yes. Like, now, do it. Like, I was like, so this is before Nightboat, right? And I was like, okay. And so, I did that. And I was like, no press is ever going to be down to do this. Like, I just know it. Like, I was kind of ready to let it be published and just like let that go. But again, immediately they were into it. And it meant a lot to me because it's also, I don't know, it's in the exact middle, right, of the
Yeah.
book. And it sort of says a lot to me about the positionality of where it is. We have these black pages sort of surrounded by white pages, which I think speaks to a lot of what the world is that we live in blackness and sort of always in relationality to whiteness and sometimes encroached upon or surrounded by whiteness. And then important to me, I was doing in my MFA dual degree, which I would never suggest for anyone ever in life. I was doing creative writing MFA alongside a visual and critical studies MA, which was so important for me and just my work and who I am as an artist. And something we were talking a lot about somewhere in that process of those years was the traditional sort of gallery space that is like white walls, and how that's just kind of like become this neutral sort of like standard idea, and how more and more as we move into contemporary and future artistic spaces, how people are pushing up against that. And I was like, well, let me go ahead and try to bring that idea onto the page. Let's invert this standard idea of always white pages and black text. Let's make it black pages and with this white text. That's particularly and very intentionally invert that assumption. And so in so many ways, it's more than just looking really cool, which it does look great. It like mattered to just what the content of the book is, and also the intentions of what the work's looking to do and speak towards.
Yeah, I like that you that's very cool that you were also an MA in the visual, because there's definitely a lot of awesome stuff that I'll ask you about later visually about the book, because it does tie so much, that even just the layout of the text and your use of the negative page space, it functions so critically as a text itself. But I'll ask you this and then see if there's some section of the book you want to read for us
Yeah.
before each section, because the book is broken up into sort of three sequences. Once again, cruel, and then untitled yellow pages. And before each section, you have these icons, the symbolism,
Yeah.
different ones for each section. So that
Yeah.
a lot also is very crucial. So there's some visual elements that are very key, or visual aspects of the book. They're very key. What's the significance of those symbols to you?
You're the first person to ask me about that. And I kind of was I'm amazed actually that you're asking, because I thought maybe no one cared to notice. Thank you for asking. So I drove those. I had gotten an iPad in my MFA, which was my first iPad, and I got the little pencil, which was actually shout out to my aunt Veronica Henry,
That's a
or
third one.
Veronica G. Galloway, yes, who's another incredible author. It's a family full of writers, and she really wanted me to get that pen. I remember being like, it's another however many dollars. And she's like, get it. And I was like, okay. And it was a great idea because for a while, I was just stuck on, I think the app is called Procreate. Is it Procreate? Procreate? That sounds very like weird, right? Maybe not Procreate. I have to remember what it is, but there's just a drawing app with all sorts of tools. And I was obsessed with it for so long. And kind of speaking to the type G2 of and the yin yang symbol, am always really interested in Chinese calligraphy and just calligraphy in general, but especially Chinese calligraphy. And was sort of like thinking of how I could make my own sort of queer Black calligraphy and like have very little sort of like restrictions or sort of just playing. Like I really didn't want to try to make anything too serious, but I did actually, each one of these for me does mean something. So this book, Cruel Cruel, was in some ways once before a book called One is All, and that's completely been scrapped. Very little of this book is One is All, except for these sort of images. And I was playing with in that book having each section be an element. So I can't remember which is which, but I do remember that the three elements I ended up going with were fire, water, and air. I believe once again was water for me. Cruel Cruel was definitely, I believe, to be air. And then the last one, untitled Yellow Pages, I feel like the most mysterious looking one is fire. And so again, just sort of like what would I visualize those three elements to be in a sort of calligraphy sense in my own sort of language. And once again, thought like this would be too weird and they would not be down, but they were very down. And I was very grateful because it was the one thing from that previous manuscript that I thought needed to be a part of this journey.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I'm glad that you said you made them because they definitely struck me. I'm like, oh, I can't for the life of me figure out if I've seen these before. Where because they have about them, they have definitely an ancient look to them, an ancient quality, as though they come from a tradition. Because there's definitely a traditional look to them. But you can definitely tell that there's a Dior spin
Yeah.
on those things. So about your book, I'm very excited to to hear you read some of it because you reading it is an interpretation from how I likely read it. Because what I love about your book is it's very difficult to tell uh, what's a poem as opposed to what's part of a sequence. They can be read as lots of poems, like a traditional poetry book. It can be read as three long poems. So it's very cool because there's no clear demarcation except for maybe in Untitled Yellow Pages where some of those are actually labeled. So it's very awesome to kind of see what you'll choose to read, what you think stands out to you, and to hear it read. So if you're okay with that, if you have some sections picked out, I'd love to hear you read some of it.
Absolutely. I definitely have some selections for you, but I always love to ask if you have any requests that I can add into my little set list.
One that take, so there's a couple
Yes, ready.
that one that I have a question prepared for
Mm,
that I'll ask you about. So Untitled Yellow Page 3, I love
mm,
that. I
mhm,
especially love the opening of it, the prayer like text of it, the
mm.
with all the insalahs. I think that's a
Yeah,
very beautiful passage, and I
absolutely.
love your because it's just so wild. I lost it here, but oh, there it is. Your plums, page 7.
Yeah, yeah, that's always going to be a favorite.
Yeah,
Always, always gonna be a
that
favorite.
one's just so like it punches you in the face there for sure.
Yes,
and and
awesome.
and definitely anywhere in your vortex passage because the cruel cruel section I just love. But there's nowhere in that I want to call out specifically. I would just like whatever you feel like you like
For
best to say.
sure. For sure, for sure, for sure. I will read a little bit from each section. Sorry if my computer's getting all loud and hot. I guess it's so excited for me to read. I should probably not have every single application you could ever imagine open
No,
on my
I do too.
but one day I will learn. So I'll read about a few pages from the first section once again. which this was and always will be very special to me. I love writing in airports. I don't know what it is, but like 8 times out of 10, I'm really jazzed up and ready to write in an airport. I don't know if it's just the transient space or all these different energies and people or the destination where you're heading to, whatever it is. Just love writing in airports. And
Do you get a
this
lot
one
done
really
on planes or just airports?
it's the airport. It's like it's never the actual flight. I usually want to sleep or listen to music on the entire flight, but it's like the airport. Usually that space of waiting to that anticipation, just things come to me. I don't know what it is. This was yeah in 2020 and heading somewhere. To AWP that one. And yeah, I kind of just wrote this. So I'll read a few pages. This is once again. Once again, reminded I am not enough, rough snout stuffed full of pretty wisdoms, no outside luster be. Once again, reminded how a smooth 7 ain't never gonna be no tantalizing 10. Once again, inferior to Greek statuesque bodies captured in grams untethered, sickle cellular devices. Once again, flying over occupied lands on a white man's snowy dime. Once again, flashes of tens of putty bodies. Once again, self-destruct, self-sabotage, self-low deeper than rivers of flyover envy. Once again, reminded I nothing, reminded I ching, reminded I worth the worth of half a feeble man or a quarter of one sparkling black boy. Once again, I expose you, exposed, we all exposed, just below the borderline. Once again, shit goes left, 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 plight, left, left. Once again, feminine nails, masculine chin strap, feminine digits, masculine eyes, masculine maudlin, feminine chainsaw, masculine born again, feminine. And I'll stop there for once again. Right. Let's see. Let's get into the black hole vortex section. I really, really, really love this section. And once again, it was just so hot. I keep saying that. Once again, I'm so grateful to Nightboat for being down for this because it really was essential. I was willing to let it go, but I'm so grateful that they were down to rock with me. Yeah, let's see. Trying to quickly think of what I'm gonna give you today. Okay. Do you want a few different pieces or my favorite longer piece from the Black Vortex section?
Oh, gotta go with your favorite. I gotta know what that is.
Oh gosh, okay. The wildest, well, I don't know. What is the wildest poem in this book? That's a good question. It's one of the wilder ones. This is on page 36, 4/14/2020. To be or not to be not. Queer fag, sweeter than Machino. Begin in reflection. Mirror possibilities, little biddies staring brown-eyed in reflection, waltzing home, plastered to the moist plywood skin of men holding you up just to lay you down. Reflection corduroy boots, reflection of corduroy immaculate, slapping you harder than any fly ball. There's still sting in our gums if you glide across them ever so. Reflection unruly, tepid, and masochistic. Reflection so farcical your peanut gallery breaks Oshun in the stands. Reflection R, reflection B, reflection so, so, so. 2 months reflection that you'll never look into without Cuervo bravado. Deciding to think post-fissure now. Reflection in Wisco Hayward mist, Found flowers wrapped up in jasper cases, reflection so high I praised Mother Gaia. Reflection's last pages tumbling blindly into an aftermath of reflection, crisp Sierra, lighting nostrils on mint, ever green, ever violet, ever rage. Reflection anchor into skin, skin crave, skin fold, skin graph, skin patty cake. Reflection under salted shroom submarines, breaking big cash into brittle bones. Trust me, trust baby reflection. Sink skin into reflection. Stay in church at least 4 hours too long reflection. Hide and go get me a lobotomy reflection. Oh, Sado reflection, pirate reflection, Mykonos reflection, baby reflection. Unwrapped decencies coiled round your protuberances. Reflection. In the name of the water and the salt and the fever. Reflection. That is probably my favorite poem in the entire collection, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it.
I love that. That was killer.
Thank you. Thank you. I might give you one more from the Blackboard text section. Oh, perfect. Let's do the last one. That way we can move right into Untitled Yellow Pages. This is the last interlude on page 51. All that just to start a poem for the new moon of my orange moon. I offer a puzzle that will madden you, but your ego feeds differently. Repulsive namesake for a bloodlust, love lust, the ratcheting of the innards. The death horn blows again, swerving in and out of intersectionality, giddy as a glumful of glee, feasting on drop-down rainbows. A poet is a poem, is a keeper. Thinking Fox had the right idea, thinking Fox is North Star, because liberation never came before a few. Never came before a few fireworks, but I've sicked dogs on men in white. A wave swirling mind membranes just to turn my head toward the flame for a bell longer. Just to turn my flame for a bell longer, like revolution's last chance. UIP3, your request, UIP3.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, this is always going to be a favorite. This is another favorite. And yeah, happy Ramadan. Ramadan Kareem. Of course, I was reading the Quran a lot in my MFA and was just amazed, mystified, in awe of it, and have so much respect for that religion and really wanted this word to be somewhere in the collection. And I think I'm very happy with how it landed here. So this is UIP 3, Untitled Yellow Page number 3. Asking all masks of capital and colonial be removed before we come to the Lord, my Lord, our Lord. None of it matters, inshallah. Say 52 Hail Marys for your ancestors lost in uncharted, unfriendly waters. Throw your back out in prayer, for they see you as your blood, inshallah. Sing hymnals at the feet of mules. Tell them change is the latest alternative milk trend. Soak that shit right up, inshallah. Praise be. And benedict your altered gaze, reconstructed eyes and fickle tongue, inshallah. Honor your blessings for a fortnight and wash your hair in red clay, inshallah. Try to wash all the masks off of you now, inshallah. Still your whitest parts into a bowl, fingernails, teeth, eye whites, combine with chicken wishbone, broken, a hefty serving of onyx fragments, and one Marvin Gaye record, also broken, inshallah. Ask that whiteness to reevaluate and see thy onyx, thou hardiest and solemnest of stones, inshallah. Ask, why be anything less? Sing to Mama Lucy, unearthed, say, inshallah, grandmother. I long for your essence of Black purity in all that I am. Outside of art, I see thyself unearthed, humming holies into the wind, spieling rhythms of hot cross tongues. Rake your ashes into the streets and make a white man cry at the waterfall of their exception. Coughing up grime disturbia, sun-spotting Black hoodies as angels of resurrection, cross out every year of expected death. Plant plum trees in your white neighbor's backyard and say, all that hangs here is more than gold. And speaking of plums, what a great end reading on. This might be the wildest poem. I don't know. Who knows what the wildest poem is? I'm going to think about this at length later. This is Untitled Yellow Page number 7. Oh, and I have to shout out both. This is a poem for two people now, for Taylor Bias, my dear friend, and for Adrian Crezo, two people who really enjoyed this poem, who I just have to always shout out when I read this. Shout out to both of them. Plum honey, plum smooth, plum overabundant, plum spiral, plum meritocracy, plum hay beetle, plum weight of all, plum overturned, reinstated, redefined, plum shiver like honeybees, plum sachet in the golden swat, plum interruption in the sub-dimension, plum rutabaga, plum sacrifice on Mole Hill, plum belief that one day the signs will be clear as frost, plum fire fish likes nothing raw, plum fool, plum irony, plum meat that grinds and redefines, plum suffrage for an overdue spring, plum honeysuckle, plum, what waste is implicit in fruition, plum might, plum direct, holy plum, holy, pretending it's something, plum split open, purple pus, playing computer, pillowing dry palm, praying sideways, praying more, because possibly pirouetting up riptides with a pumpkin-headed prissy boy, pristine and painted neon, pretend and polling and proclivities and I can stop there. I don't think I'll stop there.
Yeah,
Unless you'd like me to read more. I can always read more.
yeah. I'll ask you to. We can have you read a couple towards the end here to close us out, to
Yeah,
send us
absolutely.
off. But because yeah, that was very moving and beautiful. In fact, I think you have like a beautiful cadence to your rhythm. It definitely adds a real kind of prayer like.
Mm,
I feel like atmosphere to your poems that was like kind of rocking me with it. Really great reading style you have there.
thank you. Shout out to all those years of theater and Catholic school. Two different types of oppression. Yeah, I can read. Let's see. Mm, let's do. I'll do UIP 10 and then we'll end with 12.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Or is it? Let me make sure I'm reading what I want to read here. Okay, great. Perfect. Yeah. UIP 10. To dream past the past of shackle men and liberation lost. To dream in black neon. Looking back long ago. Wearing visors for vision scars. Seeing the unseen and undocumented. Loosening lassos on ancestry like unraveled fruit by the foot, listening Ivory Coast spirit. To think not of shackles broken, but of a time before, rewriting history to see their self in it. A land before time, or a time before land, or property, or gazes. Flowing into futures of Black uprising and bloodbath cherry streets, to see a future with violence, restorative, feigning no outline of peace, singing we shall overcome with automatics tucked in arm, Black fists raised. To not see any more forts, Nan more Olumbuses, just me and Huey and Miss Davis shooting the shit after shooting some. Seeing a new type of first contact, one devoid of erasure, one rife with life spittle, genuflect and reconnected to a vision most high, inshallah. Laying purple wreaths, royal, cross unshackled, exalted ankles, still hullabaloos swaying up like lost ballads, to sow the reaping and taste moss on your fingertips, sprinkling uncertainty with generosity and pinging onyx over alabaster. Take 3 steps to your left and grab everyone into the fold. Stolen truth costs a smooth $3.99 when your time is up. Sitting honest with self, slowly, my rue ever burning. Tell me sweetness on the solstice. Summer begat spring, begat winter, begat. I know of no new beginnings, rudimentary in hope. Palm leaves cover my eyes from centuries of dismay. Is this hearkening in my soul the call that I've been waiting for? One more chance for sanctity? Awash in bacon grease and crystallized syrups of dangerous beauty, unleashed into high-lined sierras, whisked flat with bounteous mercy. And then it's the last piece in the collection, which is actually another one of my favorites. This is Untitled Yellow, page 12. Want to write in this gold while it lasts? See, where I live, my very breath is my damnation. Want to sit in this gold and talk a while to the she we all believe should be. Want to ignore your texts and snag bite double time on raw lip. Want to wear scandalous skivvies for an audience of one. Want to see Floyd breathing and don't want to talk about it. Want to stop feeling white gaze, white gaze. Want to be religionless, since no God we know of makes sense of this. Want to slide locks open with my pinky nail, surprise bamboo men with my ladylike shrine, pull split ends, and still don't want to talk about it. Want to give every Black body a medal in a collection of plastic bags from under the sink. You'll need them. Want to give respite, yet instead biting raw lips to mimic violence. Stumping on revenge's pudgy toes is the only cleansing I know. Want to see smooth skies lined. Want to see twist, come shout.
Awesome. That was amazing. I love that as a conclusion. That's a great, I think, place to end the whole collection on as well.
Thank you. Every time someone says that, I'm so relieved because that really almost didn't make it. That really came very close to not making it. One of the editors, who I'll never name because I love her so much, thought, she told me, she's like, that's not it. I was like, really? She was like, no. Or she didn't say it that way, but she was like, do something else or like push. And I was like, okay. And I went through so many different iterations of like what the ending could be. And it always was like, no, I want to see twist become shout. That's exactly what I need. And thankfully, it seems like it's doing okay in that version. So we take what we need and we leave the rest, right?
Definitely feel one of those times when, good advice is good advice, but you also got to trust yourself.
You got to trust yourself. You got to trust yourself. And I'm proud I did it. Doing good work there.
Sticking with the Untitled Yellow Pages section and that sequence of poems, what I love about the collection as a whole is its strangeness and its confounding of expectations. And I think one of those is
Mhm.
definitely in that entire sequence, because it kind of inverts what we think of in Yellow Pages, those things that kind of help us pin down concrete information, help us navigate things, telling us very specific things that will help us, hours, locations, numbers of whatever kind of business. But for this cycle, it completely is different. We have to navigate the poems. It's the poems aren't, they're flowing for us, but they're not giving us up any easy information, and we don't come away with those easy concretizations. But instead we get kind of like this sequence of alarming mirrors that each one takes us into a deeper within ourselves, our own biases,
Mhm.
our expectations, memories, or how we respond to them. Specifically, that last one mentioning George Floyd, causing us to remember all that and feel that again, or feel it differently than maybe how it was felt from one person to the next, for sure. So when you began writing this poem cycle, did you, originally just like, oh, it was a poem here or two there, but, or when did you get this idea for this more ambitious cycle of poems?
Mhm. Yeah, this was the last section I wrote, so it actually fits where it lands in the book. It was the last set of poems I wrote, um, or at least this and the interludes in the Black Vortex middle section were the two last poems I wrote, or like series of poems that I wrote. And it's kind of twofold. So I usually am always writing very analog on paper in a journal. I have a lot of journals. I have like a database, like a backlog of journals over here. Like I always have journals ready to go. And because of the pandemic, right, the early years of the pandemic, I couldn't go and get me a new like journal as quickly as I usually do. So I ran out and I was like, oh shit. And so I just like didn't have anything but like a lot of these like random little, these are less yellow, but I had some other ones that were very, very yellow, kind of from those notepads, that you can just like rip off pages and stuff. And I hated writing on those, but it was all I had, right? And so I just was making it work. But I'm glad you kind of mentioned too the sort of duality of it also being a call to those yellow pages and those big old thick books with all this information and things so clearly laid out, right? And when I was writing these poems, I mean, there's a lot of this in the book, but I was just very, very angry. I was very angry at the state of affairs of this country. Angry being in the house, but really mostly in this section, it's anger towards what this country was going through and revealing itself to be, not for the first time, obviously, but it was just really difficult. I was very far away from like all of my family and friends. I was in the Bay Area, which I love so dearly, but couldn't, travel home and see folks or even my friends in the Midwest or the East Coast. And so it's feeling a lot of isolation and a lot of anger and processing that mostly, by myself, right? And that's what a lot of these poems are dealing with. I mean, each one's kind of a different snapshot of a moment. A poem I don't read as often, UIP2 was actually a moment of me and a friend went to a protest of an city of Oakland council member, just to like get him to hear us out. We went to his house, a big group, is a big intersectional coalition of Black folk, Korean American folk, it's all different sorts of people coming together just outside this man's house. I think it was like a Saturday or Sunday, and he had like fled the house, him and his family, like it was just so dramatic. Like in one of the pages, 63, open your windows, Lauren. Why aren't you home, Lauren? What hillside view blasts decency out of frame? Like, we can't even have the decency to like speak to us. We just wanted to talk, like it was just like kind of pathetic. But we made such a ruckus and such a noise. And that felt so good with the anger I was feeling. And that's why I think the next poem, UIP3, kind of comes to this space of reflection and prayer. Because after a certain point, I knew I couldn't hold on to this anger forever, at least not in this way. It wasn't going to do much for me. And I think that's why I love every section for different reasons, but I love this section so much because I can kind of track and see how that anger metabolized in my body and eventually was processed in a way that ends in that last line, want to see twist become shout. That is really not only for that section, but I think the entire book, sort of a thesis statement in a way for like what this work is trying to do, hoping for.
And I love that it's very literal. They were written on yellow pages, but then that duality, just sort of that serendipitous kind of
Yeah.
thing, really worked out. So about yellow page 3, the inshallah Arabic for if God wills it, or there's some variations that other people use as well. Like you said, happy Ramadan to everyone that
Absolutely.
follows that. So, and that invocation is definitely so meaningful. And I feel like when we get to it in the book, it kind of rewrites everything we've read up to that point. For sure, gives it a different slant, and then kind of changes the way we read everything after that. Because then, to me, I walked away with the feeling that the whole thing was a very prayer like, at least prayer in stages. And yeah, I had that kind of going through too. But then when I got to that inshallah section, like, oh yeah, this is definitely a very personal, specific prayer of yours that you're imparting to the reader, asking us to share in. And then I went back and looked at the aesthetics of the book as a whole. And it's so interesting to hear that you were kind of a visual artist as well, because that now in this moment adds more to it. Because just thinking about these, the way the text operates on the page with all this negative space in
Mhm.
some spots more than others, but it definitely, I feel like, has a very shrine kind of like quality to it, to the text, uh, kind of like allowing that spiritualness to manifest in different places in where is available based on kind of how the text tracks across the page. How much work and how much did I'll say, like, what kind of, how do you how is it laying the text out on the page for you? What, how often did you experiment with, like, oh, I want this to be just like a standard kind of poetry pagination, just like that, or I want, how did you kind of come across like what felt right, and how did it, like, the this now poem looks how I want it to look?
Yeah, great question. For my own purposes, my own work, I'm trying to use the word hate less. I don't enjoy just very like typical traditional poet on the page or poem on the page, left a line, a couple cute stanzas. Again, for everyone else, love it. I love a lot of poems like that. But for me, it makes me want to cry. So a lot of my visual sort of inclinations come out when I am writing. Something I was really obsessed with for years, and maybe I'm not as obsessed with anymore, but was whatever I wrote on, in my journal, I wanted it to look as close to exactly that as possible once I put it onto the digital page. And so a lot of these movements, as well as doing theater for so much of my life, I also did movement and dance. And so I just always think about how language dances and how it wants to move across the page, and playing very intentionally with that negative space and different ways, right? Kind of moving in ways that are unpredictable, that speak to a little bit of what each element maybe reminds me of in terms of movement. But so I guess like all of that is just an effort to stay true to what was on the journal pages. And largely, this is pretty much like how each of these poems like looked on page. Not 100%, but I want to say about 80 to 90%. This is like what they looked like. Now translating that onto the digital, typing it up and stuff, and then copy editing, and that was a journey. But copy editing is the worst, and it's not much better if you want to do this much visual stuff, y'all. But it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it, and I needed it to be this for me, for again my visual sort of love. I always wanted this book to be a hybrid literary and visual object. That was really important to me. And I remember in the release day, I wrote a little note asking folks if if you can, to read it all the way through as one sort of like one thing. And it is to me sort of one big prayer, like one big extended prayer. And again, I'm listening to the Quran and having no idea somehow before my first time listening that it's usually, meant to be sung. And so when I first, it's an app, right? It's like the Quran app. And I like hit play thinking I was going to be read to, and just this beautiful music just starts, flooding to my ears. And I was just so moved, so moved. I'm still so moved every time I listen. And knowing that I'm not trying to equate this to the Quran in any way, shape, or form, but knowing that there was something about that that I wanted to honor and speak to. If I could one day read this whole book in one sitting in a reading or somehow do something like that, I'd be very pleased, because that to me feels like the truest way the work is meant to be heard. But that'd be, what, an hour? I don't know. Maybe not an hour, but yeah, that'd be a long time.
I can definitely see the language dancing, and I love that you have that kind of very loving relationship with language, because there's definitely in in the collection asking us to really hop on the ride of this language, and you really stress kind of the way the language can be used. One thing I like is all the dualities throughout the book. One thing that jumps out clearly the most is we have the cover, the yin yang, like you said, but then cruel, cruel, and I don't know if people can see this on the camera, but it's cruel plain and then cruel italicized. I love that because that's kind of telling us like you have one understanding of cruel, but then it's also italicized to stress like a different sense of it, like maybe like a very platonic kind of like essence, substance kind of situation, or a different kind of thing. But it lets us know that there's a different tone of it being hit than we might think, because
Yeah.
cruel is kind of one of those words where a lot of people might only have one association with it. It's bad.
Mhm,
Like we
mhm,
only like
mhm.
cruel things that happen to us are cruel, all bad. But you're asking us to get more out of that, rather than letting us be pigeonholed by any singular word, that there's always another dimension to things. And I love that multi-dimensionality in the work, which is why I think Cruel Cruel is such a fun kind of cool title. uh about the title, how did you settle on Cruel Cruel? That like you're like, this is the title, I want this fits the whole book.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Another question I don't get super often, but I really love speaking to. So the middle section, the vortex section, which is the only section in the book that has like dates, before each poem, came from a challenge from my dear, dear, dear old professor, ex-professor, now mentor and beloved, Tanya M. Foster, who at the time was my professor, and challenged us for National Poetry Month, which is April, to write a poem a day, which that was a cruelty to me in and of itself, because I can't. I mean, I did it, and here we are. So thanks, Tanya. But I just remember like looking at her in class, being like, "Are you kidding me right now? Like, who, how, like how?" So that was the first time I think cruel kind of popped into my mind, and thinking about how April, National Poetry Month, what is it like? It's April is the cruelest month of the year, sort of a folklore there, right? And how, like you said, like there's meant to be a very particular play on the duality of the word, or even the multiplicity of the word, right? Like I love this thing I do sometimes around any word. You can take like any word, like potato, and if you just say it a bajillion times, potato, 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 like you'll start to be like, what is this word? Like what is it actually? I guess we have a definition and we know like what it is, but really, what else is it, right? And so thinking about cruel and writing those poems in the middle section all of April 2020, and being just like, what is cruelty? And again, thinking of everything that was going on in the country at the time, and just thinking of all of the myriad of cruelties we were experiencing and facing and dealing with. I was just really, really obsessed with that word for a long time. I just like couldn't get away from it, but it never felt right to just name the book Cruel, right? That would be kind of a terrible title, I think. But I knew it had to be that sort of duality. And yes, one is sort of just like normally printed, and then the second is that italicized, to suggest like, what is the slant of cruel we're talking about when we say that? What are the different types of slants of cruelty? Are there beautiful cruelties? I think you could argue that. I think there are some moments of beautiful cruelty in this collection. I think there are a lot of moments of anger-filled cruelty, and so on and so on and so forth. But that was really, really important for me to keep that title as Cruel Cruel. And again, shout out to Tanya for listen to your professors, guys. Listen to them. Sometimes it's really crazy things, but then maybe one day you can get a book out of it. So I love Tanya very much.
A little bit of a eulogy about your book, because I love the strangeness of it. And I think strange is such a great complimentary term for
Yes.
literature, because it makes us like look at familiar things very differently than we're used to. I think that your book definitely does that. It achieves that strangeness with language, with just basic words, causing us to look at, like you said, the multiplicity of them, that they hit us. uh and so nothing in here is quite familiar, even just like what is a poem, what is a sequence, how are things supposed to look on the page, what's the actual right color for a page, because now it's like, well, maybe black is the ultimate best color for a page. And I'm glad you read this line when you read, because it stood out to me. I love this line of yours: a poet is a poem is a keeper, because that's such a beautiful line, because a poet is a poem. So now a poet is this one thing, but then a poem is a keeper. So something that we keep, or something that withholds from us. There's such wonderful dualities, or like you said, multiplicities of meaning in each thing. And listening to you talking about kind of the personal anecdotes that went behind some of these poems, I got definitely a lot of you in this book. I love that your personality is everywhere. It's so invested, so personal. How do you feel like your personality kind of infuses your overall poetic style, and how important is that to you? And do you ever maybe approach other poems dispassionately, like try to dislocate yourself as much as possible from some poems?
Thank you. Another these beautiful questions. Thank you so much. The first review and the first and so far only review from Poetry Foundation used a few words that I really enjoyed. It was beguiling, I think was one of them, and like emphatic, patternless, scattered. It was all these like, it was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, that's it. And I think that is part of who I am sometimes too. I can be I'm a very strong Pisces, as I mentioned. My brain goes all over the place, and I have a lot of thoughts all the time, and they're moving very fast, very rapidly. There's a lot of movement at any given point in time. And so that's there, right? Like that, I think, is part of me that's here in this collection. And it is a very personal book in ways that I was very shy about for a long time, but not so much anymore. I will say the second book that is being worked on, I'm trying to work on how I can deconstruct, if not destroy and murder the I. We'll see how that goes. But for this, though, I sort of knew that there could be no other way I could begin my life, this journey in poetry, if not starting with this. It is incredibly personal. It is so much of me, there's so much, talk in the poetry world of not always the speaker isn't always the writer, which it absolutely isn't, but in this book, it definitely is me. It is me, right? But I knew I had to do that because, again, there's just something about the phenomena of the anger and the depths of that anger that I was moving through in 2020, very like alone, right? That I just produced this work, and it would have been untrue for me to just ignore it entirely and try to like move on into some like sort of prettier, maybe a little more brighter collection of work, which I don't know if I write poems, but this was really just true to who I was and where I was in this time. And in a lot of ways, I view this book being, out in the world now and sort of a finished product as a sort of release of that energy. I'm very spiritual in a lot of ways. And I just really wanted this, like I said, this big prayer to be a sort of offering to that very angry, lonely, confused, enraged Dior in 2020 who had no idea, we'd be here now in 2023, which I look at it now and I'm just so happy because, again, cruel, right? Those feelings are cruel, painful sometimes. And that cruelty, the other side of that, the other inverted side of that is this joy in this beautiful collection of work, or this object that I admire so much. So I think that's why, or how I came into this work specifically. I think I always I process a lot of things through not necessarily me, but just like, okay, when I receive information, I'm like, okay, well then how am I feeling about this, right? What is it making me think about or feel, or how is it moving me? And then I can kind of move into more like, uh, I don't know, hard facts about things and stuff like that. Really, with any sort of information, I have to sort of process it emotionally first. And that's why I think poetry is such a huge help for me in a consistent practice in my life, because it really helps me move and move through things, learn things, digest things in myself. I learn a lot about myself through poetry, and I learn a lot about the world. This book, I learned a lot about so much about this country while writing this book that I maybe I needed to learn, but wasn't the most fun. But again, I needed to do that, and poetry, thank the Lord, was this like vessel for me to feel safe in doing that.
Definitely. So, last couple of questions I have for you, and then maybe ask you to if you want to read something that closes out here. But I loved your note, kind of like this practice you said you did sometimes with words, where you just like speak a word until it kind of like is sort of bamboozled and means nothing.
Yeah,
Is,
yeah.
is there? It made me wonder if you have any sort of other, maybe like not necessarily it has to be specific towards like your craft, but any other syncretic, maybe like approaches to language that you feel like really like are like very helpful to you in approaching language in the way that you do.
Yeah. Um, I always actually one of my students this semester, just like this week or last week, had me or helped me realize that I almost always read something aloud as I'm writing it. I have to be able to find the rhythm and the cadence of it, and they're not the same across every poem, right? Which would make it a lot easier. But I have to figure out what each particular piece, what that rhythm and beat and flow is, because it has always something, some different intention, some different sort of river that it's flowing and moving through. So I have to hear it aloud. So even as I'm writing, I'm usually speaking it aloud to myself, maybe looking kind of wild and weird if I'm in public, but I just have to hear it aloud. I have to hear it aloud. Otherwise, it just won't work for me. And thankfully, the movement, like the, lineation and jamming, all the movement on the page, that comes to me very much just from an instinctual place. I don't really have to think about that too much, which I'm really grateful for. It gets, again, like when you put it onto the digital page, some things change. So, but even still, that's very natural for me. But I have to look at it then, right? If I just like kind of stare, kind of similar to repeating a word a bunch of times, if I just keep looking at the poem, right? I'm like, oh, that doesn't look right at all. There were so many notes, and we went through 6 passes of this book, right, in the copy editing phase. And they were just like, at the end there were such like what I thought would be like the most annoying notes, like, oh, move that word over like literally one space bar or like it has to be. It just can't. Like these very, very particular notes. And so thanks again to Nightboat for not choking me out. Because I'm choking kind of annoying after a while there. But really, there's a certain like, even like, I don't know, each page, like I really am like, oh, that has to be that there. And I can't always explain why I feel that way, but I know exactly where it needs to be. And even now, there's a couple points in here, I'm like, damn, I missed that. But, in the second printing, might be a couple fixes. But I really am grateful for this sort of instinctual, I don't know, gift that I have in terms of just being that familiar with my work, which took a while, right? It took a while. Didn't just come about, one day I woke up and ooh, I knew what I wanted to do with my work, but it took a long time. And I'm grateful to a lot of my experiences in my MFA before getting into that and doing that experience, which you do not always have to do an MFA to do the work at all. But for me, I knew I needed 2 years to be challenged, be pushed. I had no idea really about just, I knew I could write poetry. I knew I loved poetry, but I didn't know about the traditions. I didn't know about my poetic ancestors. I knew a few, but I needed all that. I needed people to expose me to so many things. And that helped me get to a certain amount of confidence that allowed me to make this book. Even finishing it in my MFA and presenting it as a dissertation, I was still kind of unsure. I was like, I don't know what this is really. This feels like a big old anger vomit. And after some time coming to a very, very special place and relationship with it, I really do love this book. Like, I don't know, I will never look back and regret this. Like, I won't. This is very, very special to me. And no matter what comes after this was the best way to start.
That's definitely good, and you shouldn't regret it. You should love it. But first books, sometimes people have rocky relationships,
Yes.
definitely with them. Uh, with your thinking about your personal stance on and personal relationship with rhythm, and then remembering you like to write in airports. Do you like write in silence or write in music preferably? Does like having another rhythm going on ever make it harder for you to find your own rhythm?
I can only write in like three settings: silence, or like silence of nature. So I write a lot. I had this beautiful backyard. The first year and some change that I lived in the Bay in Oakland, West Oakland, was like really randomly huge. And like it felt like a Disney movie, like all sorts of critters and creatures like would come by. I mean, it was like ridiculous. Shout out to that home. It was beautiful. And a lot of this poem or this book was written in that backyard, again, in the pandemic, and being thankful. I didn't have to just be in the house all the time. I'd go into this backyard and hear nature and also hear city sounds. I love city sounds. So nature sounds, silence, city sounds. And maybe the fourth would be I cannot listen to words with music. Like it can't have words, nothing at
Yeah,
all. I listen to a lot of like meditation music, ambient music, all that genre of music. It'll also be in my ear in the space sometimes, but no words at all. Like it can't be familiar. It can be familiar if it's like, no words, but it can't be familiar in terms of like another rhythm that someone else is creating. I love my hip hop, rap, and R&B, but I can't listen to that when I'm writing because then I'm gonna start writing like, Kendrick Lamar, which I wish. I wish. But yeah, those are my preferred soundscapes of writing.
awesome. So this is my last question for you, and then if you want to read one kind of concluding something concluding for us to say
Sure.
goodbye to everybody.
Mhm.
You're talking a lot about 2020 Dior and how this book trying to solve a lot of the emotions that's going on with them. Now,
Yeah.
2023 Dior, do you how do you feel? How do you feel like you've served 2020 Dior? Do you feel like this book did what you needed to do for yourself personally? Left you with any like kind of things you're still looking to solve, maybe going forward, or where do you feel like how do you feel like 2020 Dior would look at you?
Oh, make me a little emotional to think about. I think 2020 Dior would be amazed, confused, but also at ease, which is the best thing I could wish for 2020 Dior. Life is an ongoing journey. We're always improving and going up or whatever direction is best for us, right? But like again, I really had like as much as this book is now something for the world and everyone to read, this was so much for me and a huge healing process for me in writing these poems. And I think 2020 Dior would be just both so happy that I had the strength and confidence and wherewithal to put it out into the world, but also just like amazed that people are responding to it in the way that they are. And even 2023 Dior being so grateful about that. But yeah, I almost kind of wish, sometimes time travel not being a thing, but I wish I could pop back to that Dior and be like, look at this thing you're going to do. Look at what it's going to become. I don't think I really, I wasn't necessarily writing these poems. I was definitely writing them. I'm just always writing. I write a lot. And I knew I had to make a dissertation, right? And I was like, okay. And I did sort of go into my MFA with a dream and a prayer and a wish that whatever my MFA dissertation was going to be, I wanted it to be my debut collection of poems, and I wanted it to be published, or I wanted to at least get a contract within the first year. And I prayed on it, and I prayed on it, and I prayed on it, and it somehow came true. And so I just really think 2020 Dior would be really at ease, which is genuinely the best thing that he could have used back then.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very happy to hear that as well.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. And yeah, last poem. Definitely. Let me think. Gotta make sure it's the right one. I think I already know what it is, but now I'm just flipping through. Okay. Yeah, I know which one it is. Yes. We'll do Interlude Alpha on page 23. This is another one of my absolute favorites. And shout out to Trisha Lowe, who brought this book to Night Boat and who also had the foresight and the brilliance to be like, as we were getting near the end of the, construction of the book, and she was like, I think you like had some poems you were writing once upon a time, because she was my last semester of my MFA, my poetry workshop professor. She was like, you had some work you were showing back then that I feel like needs to be in here. And I was like, I have this really bad thing where I write so much that I'll forget. I'll forget about what I've written. I'm like, oh yeah, that like I completely forgot about these poems. And she remembered them. So thank you, Trisha. And I am so happy she did because they fit exactly like we both wanted them to. So this is Interlude Alpha. Light reflecting by the orange moon of my last heart. Tell me how the wind chimes from 6 miles down the pass. Feeling the same song sung over time. 6 years running, 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 Apollo landing in this Saturn return. A sweet picking of scabs, a bright towel brushed over 9-inch knife wounds, reflecting strands of feminine joy passed down the 3 line. Tell me how nectarful the forward 6s march. Tell me the prize has upped its elemental till the marble tumbles and the moon sinks, till the past passes, till then, till God, till Willie, till Murray, till all the cups have been spilled.
Awesome. And beautiful ending. I love that we're closing on those till the marble tumbles and the moon sinks till the past passes with a beautiful sentiment. So, Dior,
Shout out
thank
to
you again for
Bastards.
thank you again for joining me, and for everyone here. The link to their book, Cruel Cruel, will be in the description box out from Nightboat, and then all their contact information, their Twitter at Dolphin Neptune, their Instagram at Dolphin Photos. Very fun tweeter, so I definitely recommend following along for the fun
Yeah.
kind of memes and everything. The very big attitude that's going on. That's awesome.
Thank you so much, Shane. Thank you for having me. Thanks for these incredible questions and for being such a fan and champion of the work. I really appreciate it. I feel like you have a real good vibe of what this book's trying to do. So I appreciate you.
Oh, definitely. I'm glad. I'm glad that I got it right, because that's always the thing. I'm feeling what it's doing, but hopefully I'm in the ballpark. So I'm
Okay.
glad to hear that I was feeling the pick up the right vibes.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Thanks so much. This has been amazing.
All right, so uh, join me next time on this YouTube channel, and Dior, I'll talk to you soon then.
Yes, you will. All right.
Sorry, that's the wrong button. I always get this stop.
I'll record, but